welcome to our about for leading this generation discussion. So I prepared this video and I hear the video not being available, and I couldn't find the video on my social media, Instagram. I loaded and uploaded the video and I made a video explanation for everyone. So I'm really cool to once again unveil what our discussion leading generation really is doing. And really prepared a complete requirement for our generation to respond to that, and that is important in our generation. I mentioned that previous video that I discussed while my comes from it, that is exactly explained in the summit. When it comes to circumstances in this world, when it comes to aggression amongst communities, when it comes to things that affect the people, and the times themselves maybe the times ourselves maybe on social media with our businesses, at times ourselves maybe somewhere where we are required to be at a community, then we are directly affected with all that are happening amongst community. And only because of that, we have the requirement to learn to educate the generation of people. How do we respond to that? And that is important. How do we respond to that? And that requires a response. I have mentioned earlier that we had the Respond discussion 2023-2022, and our Respond discussion goes hand in hand with our attentiveness, assertiveness, awakeness, awareness, and consciousness that are required with all that mankind find themselves challenged with. Another mention that I have made was our discussion of black and white overall with color that we are going to have in the room discussion this year. We're going to thoroughly educate on where our generation finds themselves at challenged with that they became familiar with the black that was according to them the deprived part of our generation, and the white that was according to mankind the more advantaged part of our humanity on earth, and the more advantaged people on earth. And only because of the educations that we receive, I've mentioned, and I'm going to mention thoroughly again, that the aggression that were caused between the different nationalities was never an aggression that were meant to oppress humanity. It was that requirement to respond to the color that is our walk, our talk, our attitude, our black and white overruled with color. How do we respond? Normally, respond requires you to be awake to respond. And in the awakeness of our Evoke season, of all that we educate with Evoke, we have the requirement to listen to. When you respond, before responding, you respond with that awakened mindset that is the consciousness of what you might be challenged with, or where you might find yourself at in your season. Another thing that we have mentioned earlier is the requirement for our generation to learn that when we educated on attentiveness, assertiveness, awakeness, and awareness, it is that consciousness that sometimes you have to be conscious on where you are at. Awareness does not become the warning in the discussion room of where our generation builds office at. I've mentioned the different rooms, the different colors, the different nationalities, the different language barriers, the different requirements to respond. And therefore, we are on the same education this year. That is our traditional background differences, our religious differences, our different requirements to respond to that, and that is the different nationalities that represents a color. Every nationality represents a different color. We have the Chinese, the Japanese, the Vietnamese, the North Koreans, South Koreans, the Philippines, and the Taiwanese. They are brother countries, and therefore the one house education is a requirement where our generation has to learn that when we became educated about the color, South African people call the lighter South African people the colored people. Brazilians, the colored Mexicans, the colored Maoris, the colored people of our generation, and therefore the requirement to educate in all that we have been informed about is that becomes our black and white overruled with color. Now we have a lot that we can add up and that we can say, and a lot that we can explain. But I'm thoroughly just gonna draft us through an explanation of how do we structure ourselves in everything that becomes offers. How do we structure ourselves in everything that requires us to manage it in a way that is fine for every part of where humanity finds themselves at. How do we structure ourselves with all that we are sometimes required to react on. We know that everything requires a reaction. We always educated earlier last year that we react before reacting. When you react before you react, when you respond before you respond in an awakened mindset, because a response requires you to be awake. And when you learn to respond before you respond, you learn to prepare yourself to respond in a way that is fine for you, and therefore learn to respond in a way that is fine for someone else. And that is where we are at with our leading this generation discussing this year, with our black and our white overruled, what color this year, what all that we educate in the entertainment industry, all that we educate on television, all that we educate in the fashion industry, all that are educated in the education departments of humanity, all that we learn in the offices and how offices are structured, and therefore to be structured in all of those processes is the everything new that we add. It becomes that we had a song written that is something new, a gospel song, and our song is available on Start.com, yes. And with the everything new requirement, we learn that a baby is born every second. You know that man finds themselves on this earth. And everything about this earth is exactly birth, right? It is the newness of the universe. And when we are exposed to so much, we have a requirement to educate ourselves, to find ourselves fine in all that we are exposed to. And when we're exposed to so much, we have a requirement to learn that everything about the universe is a sex room. And when it is a sex room, it requires us to know that within that, the birthness happens every second. And when birth happens every second, everything new becomes our everything new response that are required with all that we are challenged with, and that with all that we have to respond with. And therefore, with our everything new approach this year, I want us to have our mindset attentive to how exposed is our generation, how nude are we, how do we require ourselves to allow ourselves to be fine when there's so much that are being discovered about us on a daily basis. I have mentioned in one of our discussions last year, and that is that who is going to discover you on that day. In this universe, we learn that the communications are vast and are amazing and are very advanced. And when we learn that there's so much happening amongst humanity, and there's so much that humanity can be exposed to, humanity has to allow themselves to not just disregard what we have become familiar with, where we learn about the differences in the different countries and the different nationalities, but we have to educate ourselves. Who's going to discover you on that day? How are you going to react in a way that is fine for you and that is fine for the other people, so that other generations doesn't find themselves so much more aggressed than the earth has already been aggressed, right? And therefore, our direct requirement that is the offers, they direct the business that it owns, right? I've mentioned the post, and I'm gonna share on the post, not in this video today. I'm gonna share more on the post in our next videos in the first term of leading this generation this year. And it is, but today I want to focus on the offers, they direct its very own business. The business becomes you, the employee, that also finds yourself employed at the business. The business becomes every communication that the office has with the next office, right? The business becomes that is your every requirement to own your seat at the business, your every requirement to learn what your business are exposed to, your every requirement to understand what type of business you are employed for. I've mentioned that I've been invited to Dubai in 2004, and today it's 2024, and we're going to discuss that in a few seconds. looking for a Vogue cup quite some time, and we found the cup in the cupboard today. So everyone welcomes the Vogue business into the room of discussions. And we're going to draft us quickly through what to prepare for next month and the month after that with our thorough discussions, right? And our thorough education. And we went to Dubai in 2004, and today it's 2024. When I went to Dubai, I learned about the hotel industry. I remember being in Dubai, my sister called and said, Ribea, because the world is sometimes exposed to a lot, and because it's on the roads, and I then learned what is happening in the world. And I remember sitting in front of Al Jazeera television in 2004 in Dubai, and I learned that there's wars in this world, right? And today I find myself in Auckland, New Zealand, and I've learned how you, the person, can be affected by the office that you were employed at. I've been employed in Auckland at so many businesses. One of the businesses was Stamford Plaza Hotel, and I've learned that in Stamford Plaza, I remember when I was there that the Jackson 5 came to visit, and I shared that on my page when I was employed there in human resources. And because of everything that we can sometimes be exposed to, and that is sometimes everything about us being human beings, right? We have to educate ourselves to be familiar with where you are employed at the business. We have explained that the church industry and the hotel industry, that is the dance and the club lifestyles, should most of the times not be in contrast to one another. We have learned that in our generation we find ourselves where the two are in contrast sometimes to one another because of the mafia lifestyles, because of drug abuse, of alcohol abuse. But when we learn that the requirement to educate one house education is important, we learn that the black and the white overruled with the color of a difference is that requirement for our generation to educate in the currentness of that is our attentiveness, our awakeness, our daily sun, awoken day, our assertiveness, and our awareness, the consciousness of the dangerous requirements that we have to sometimes respond to. And only because of that, we are required to structure ourselves. Only because the processes that we are dealing with being human beings on this earth, that office people has to deal with on a daily basis, affect a lot of international communications. It does not mean when you find yourself in a country like New Zealand and you are employed in a business like Stamford Plaza Hotel, that you are not sometimes in communications with everything that affects the different countries. It means that when we are employed at certain businesses, we have to educate ourselves that you are in the room. The room's color is this. Your requirement to learn that there was once apartheid, that was maybe not necessarily apartheid, but for a generation of people to learn to accept one another's differences and to learn to add to that, that is giving birth to the everything new with whatever they are required to respond to. And therefore, we have to constantly allow ourselves to listen to what is the requirement for you in the business that you are employed at. We have to constantly allow ourselves to listen to how does office structure itself in a generation that are challenged with so much discussions. We have to constantly tell ourselves that in a country like New Zealand, there's so much international people, meaning so much international processes being managed from New Zealand to international countries. How does the New Zealand office people, how are they required to manage and to structure their processes so that it's non-abusive to themselves and so that it's non-abusive to the international countries? And that is not scientific knowledge to educate ourselves. And that is not scientific knowledge to allow ourselves to structure our every year with that requirement of when I communicate on my social media page and I'm employed in the office in New Zealand. Both business is in entertainment. Entertainment is fashion, and the requirement for entertainment and profession is to explain all that are required in season. When I find myself being employed in a different business, I have the requirement to learn what business am I employed at, how am I required to respond to the business itself, and to be fine where I'm at, because the business becomes part of your daily life, right? We were educated that we find ourselves 40 hours a day, a Monday to a Friday, in the office environment. And when you spend so much time in the office and you have 2 days off with family, it educates you immensely the importance that the office day forms part of your daily life on this amazing earth, right? And therefore, we have a lot to structure and to manage, and everything is manageable. I've mentioned everything that we do becomes building office. Someone manage it, it becomes a business of someone else, and our generation moves on with making it fine and easier for one another, right? Another thing that I want to mention is when it comes to the different businesses that are being managed from Auckland, New Zealand into the international world. The requirement for Auckland, New Zealand employees and business owners and business managers is to learn to listen to last year the challenges was that in the international world, how are the business communications affecting the challenges that the international world has. And therefore, when we find ourselves on a pace that is not a too fast pace for everyone, but a pace that is fine for you, meaning that every communication that we share to the international world, we revise, we refresh, we renew, we revive it in our mindsets, in our reactions, in our attitudes. We revise what we are doing. We refresh our ways of reacting. We refresh the greenness of our picture, and our requirement to respond to that is the awakeness that it's going to present when the international world works with your business, right? It is that business owners has to find themselves accepting themselves amongst the international world itself. The international world presents all the colors, black, white, pink, all the nationalities, different nations, and in all of that we are one house family education. And in the one house, what do we present as businesses to the international world? How is our communications to the international world? When I find myself being in part of international sports, then I'm not going to stir aggression in another country. I'm not going to schedule sports events that are oppressive to countries that are in war. I'm not going to schedule sports events that are abusive to certain countries or certain people. So with every process that our generation have to manage, we have to tell ourselves, what do we do with the everything new requirement? That is, how do we manage business in our generation? How do we build office amongst our generation and with all the different requirements that our generation has to respond to? That is where we are at with this year's discussions. It is that we can blame the Parliamentary House for everything that we do, but everything that we do is ourselves. And therefore, whatever we present out there, thank you, America, for the black and white overall with color initiatives that Ja Rule and the teams shared on a few years ago. Ja Rule is one of the songs. I've shared a few songs on our road fashion. They are in the season of black and white overall with color also. My cousin Aria is Chick was running front with our communications of about in the fashion industry, and they are amazingly educating our generation to accept one another. And therefore we find ourselves in one house in communication and in one house education, that nothing is ever wrong, but we have a requirement to educate, and that if this is presented to another generation, how would they find themselves fine, right? If all of these lifestyles are presented to another generation, and then we have an advantage to load our videos, to educate the generation through, so that years from today, when a generation press play on our Mona Lisa vote page, and then they listen to what is it that one generation experience, and how can one generation be exposed to what other generations experience, right? And that is where we are at with the second phase of the year's discussions, our black and white overall with color. Now the communication that we're going to share on this year and that requires a response is the business that becomes the color that you present. When you are employed at a business, the color that the business presents to humanity, it becomes you, the person being employed at the business, and to learn to know when you go for an interview what business is fine for you, what business is not fine for you. How would you be affected by the business structure? What type of business are you going for employment role, and And then we learn to know where we find ourselves at, so that we're not gonna leave one another in a generation that we say that we just leave one another halfway, we just leave one another out there, and everyone must find their way through, right? Ribea Elise says, I'm very fine with explaining everything thoroughly that I can. My career history and my employment history allowed me to have had the experience of what is really happening amongst businesses in this world. And therefore, I'm very kind and sharing that on our podcast. And let's conclude with this, discuss with this quickly. That is our Aisha, right? I have mentioned before about the Aisha person. I'm going to mention on another video that 2020, I've met a few Aisha women, right, with the names Aisha. 2020, a woman came to me with the name Aisha, and I was having a prayer meeting, and the woman came to me and said that she was blessed with a business, a seamistry business. Now, my mama Anna Philander, my mama used to do seamistry work, and she used to sell clothing, right, many years ago. And then the auntie said that she stayed 2 houses from us, right, a house next to us, and that she is actually someone, her sister was married, her brother was married to my auntie. And then the auntie explained to me that she was in a car accident. I remember, and someone blessed her with the seamistry machines and with everything about the business, and she got employees, and she really required just a room to be structured so that she can really go on with the business on the winter season. And when it's hot in the summer, so that the employees that she have employed in the community find themselves having employment. And I remember I invited the auntie to one of our days, color days that we had in 2020, and I shared on our Facebook page our discussions, and I shared our team there. And the auntie said that she had an accident and she went through an operation. When she was in the operation room, they operated on her brain. And while they operated on her brain, she had a dream, and in the dream, the Spirit of God gave her Holy Communion. And with the Holy Communion that she received, she dreamed that someone was singing a song, and God was singing a song that is great is thy faithfulness. And I remember after the auntie told me that my sister Antoinette used to sing it at Malvina's grandfather's funeral, right? And I remember that when my sister Antoinette was singing the song, the auntie told me times after Antoinette was singing the song. But it inspired me because of the awakeness that the auntie reacted, that she didn't know me in person, but when she saw me, she invited me into her house. And when I explained to her who I was, then she was able to really share her story with me. And I remember the ISA processes amongst humanity, right? And the auntie woke up after the operation and she was fine. And how the ISA processes amongst humanity is all over the place. And I remember I had to shift Malvina one side and say, but your business, I really do not know, but it's the whole time like it's in my way. And I really had to shift it aside. And I remember I was very direct with my communications. And I've learned that the things that women experience on this earth, Muslim women that looks the same, the Aisha processes amongst the humanity are somewhat not structured and somewhat sometimes dangerous to other human beings, right? And I became familiar with the process. Some women has to hide themselves with not revealing how they look, because Aisha women all look the same. And countries were sometimes finding themselves challenged with the Aisha process amongst humanity. And only because of that, we have to allow ourselves to educate that is, how do we structure our processes in a way that's non-abusive to ourselves and that's non-abusive to other people. Because there's nothing wrong with the processes that humanity have and are required to manage, right? And I remember the Vanderpump Rules team's program that I watched also came with the same ISA process initiatives. And I remember realizing how the process is in my way with my about business, and how sometimes you have to switch the television off. But sometimes television switching off is not only that. It becomes that when you do fashion, when you do business, when you are on social media as a business owner, then you might be exposed to a lot that other businesses are exposed to. And because of that, we have the requirement to educate ourselves, to allow ourselves to structure where we are at and how we educate. Not everything that humanity find themselves with business with can be shut down. Not everything that Elise is saying is going to be wrong on that day. Sometimes we have to allow ourselves to listen to Who is this person? Listen to get to know the person, and then get to know how to react with that are required to be reacted in our seasons. And I know I've said a lot with building office amongst our generation, but we have the requirement to learn to know that everything that we do becomes offers. When the Gerson project, that they call it, the Gerson was a person's name. And around Gerson was a few houses. And Gerson then went to someone's house that was a British American tobacco process house. People were employed there. And I remember the things that happened around the process, right? There was a great art house opposite there. There was a police house behind the house. Power hospital people that were working there, and Gerson was the boyfriend that I was now dating, and not dating on an everyday basis, but getting to me. And the Gerson situation was now named the boy Gerson's name, and the process was that there's a lot of communications around the house, and the sensitivity is that some people might have their eyes on Ribea, because remember, Gerson looked like an African American boy, but he was actually South African, and he was actually dark in skin color. And that day became a process to humanity where everyone's eyes was now also on Ribea, Elise. And only because of that, we have to sometimes allow ourselves to listen to how do we structure, how do we educate structure in a generation that sometimes find themselves busy with so much, right? Another thing that I want to mention is when Mama Anna Philander was moving from Eland's play with Brother Martin Philander and the 1969 earthquake, the requirement for our generation, Anna Kialindo, Anna 1969, Anna Bontabok Street, right? However, all the names that Mama Anna presented and said that we must write a book, Anna, and we must publish the book because her journey is a requirement for a generation to respond fine at when they find themselves challenged. I remember my oldest brother that was 6 months at the time, and he's 55 years old this year. And in the amazingness of all that I've learned that me, Ribea, Elise might be exposed to, I have the requirement to respond to that that is important and that requires structure, right? And the right from wrong application with everything that we do and with all that we are required to respond to. Let us allow ourselves to listen to our vote leading this generation discussion 2024 that is structure and that requires us to manage where we are at in a fine way for ourselves and in a fine way for everyone. Another thing that I want to mention for business owners that we are going to educate throughout the year is our different types of offices and the different types of industries and how every industry affects the other industry. When you find yourself a Stanford Plaza in Auckland, New Zealand, and you learn there's a Stanford Plaza also in Dubai, and then you learn that the world is actually one world. And then you learn the communication in the world is actually one. When you learn that the processes in your country might affect someone else, then you don't just suck a Ribea Elise out of the room. You don't just close your ears in listening to what Ribea Elise has to educate, but you allow yourself to listen to what is Ribea Elise exactly educating, and that is a requirement for our generation to respond fine. Another thing that we have learned over the years is the international businesses that has one management structure. But the management structure sometimes are not implemented in all the countries. So that's what we are going to focus on this year, is the requirement for all of the processes that we find ourselves thinking that because I'm in one country and the process are managed fine, then the other countries' situations and poverties are their own. Other countries' poverties are never their own, Ribea Elise, because the process affects everyone. When we look around us and we learn there's so much international people around us, and then we learn that the processes in the world are actually one process. It's being managed in a way and in a pace that is fine for everyone and that is safe for everyone, but sometimes it requires us to share information because sharing information is of utmost importance when some people in the world that find themselves in poverty countries does not realize that the processes are actually one process. We call it a one house, one family. We're educated to become stronger. And that's the requirement for our generation to learn. That when we look at the world and we look at the differences, then we do not close our ears, we do not close our eyes for what the world are exposed to. We allow ourselves in our countries and houses that we are fine at to listen to what is structure and what does it mean to the world and to humanity in general. We allow ourselves to listen to how our humanity required to structure themselves in a way that the processes sometimes are a one house process. It's managed in a one house reaction, and every country finds themselves find themselves out of the aggressions of war and the oppressions of poverty. And that is where we're going to be at, word leading this generation. The offers, they direct its very own business. We are the directors in the offers. Our days and our employments and our employee agreements becomes part of the offer structure. And how we direct is how do we do business, the one with the other in this world. Because everything we do becomes business. And that is it, everyone. We're not going to say a lot in this video today. And with our opening discussion with leading this generation, we just want everyone to prepare themselves and to know that this is where we are at. Listen to our podcast and we share about thorough information on our podcast with leading this generation structure with Ribea and Elise. Have an amazing, vocal season with us.